Okay, so for those who like a bit of smutty innuendo with their guitars, can I introduce to you the guitar that for the last while I've been calling the Hagstrom Ultra Blonde Super Swede Au Pair. That's because I couldn't quite work out what its real name was, but I think it's the Select Super Swede, the Hagstrom Select Super Swede, and it's a blonde one. So forgive me for thinking it sounds like a kind of smutty joke about 1970s au pairs. So this is a guitar that my friend and customer Malcolm has bought on eBay, and it's a really interesting guitar because he's bought this at a price that falls into that really interesting pricing zone on eBay, I would say between about £170 and about £250 is that sort of price range where there's an amazing array of good things to be had for that kind of money, including slightly loose jack plug, for which I have a new tool, which is pretty good. But yeah, so this Super Swede, this Super Swede by Hagstrom, it's come in at that about £170, £180 mark, which is about the same sort of price as the much loved Squier standard Strats sell for when I've done a setup on them, that kind of money. So kind of comparable. This is obviously bought as unseen, you know, and taking a risk, and you don't quite know what the setup is before you get it. But he's got a great guitar here. It's a, I don't know what you call it, a single cutaway. I guess it's a kind of a sort of Les Paul with a bit more PRS than Les Paul to it. Got a beautiful, what do they call that thing? You know, maple thing with the nice patterns on it. I've forgotten the word. You know, so yeah, it's got a 3-position switch. It's got a coil tapping button, which is there, and you've got the tone and volume, and a couple of unbranded humbuckers. I'm not sure what they are, but what you've got in this guitar is some really interesting, unusual looking tuners. They're branded with marked or stamped with Hagstrom, and a distinctive headstock as well. But you've got an incredibly thin neck, and really is ultra thin down here, and not so fat down there either. So great. If you really like thin necks, this is a great guitar for you. It's got a Tune-o-matic bridge down here, very familiar looking thing, and at the back here it's got an interesting stop or tailpiece which is mounted on a Perspex block, and I don't know if you can see how well you can see, but it has sort of staggered string attachment points, and without getting that bit off, I don't quite know what the function they serve. But you can see the maple top on this guitar very clearly. It's very neatly made, very finely finished. On this guitar there are one or two tiny blemishes. There's a little crack in the binding there, or the top little crack, and there is also, we noticed when we had a good look at it today, there are some very, very, very fine, I don't think you'll be able to see this, but I could use my, I could use my dazzle me, but you can see better. We've got a couple of very, very fine cracks at the point where the corner where the nut sits, so the cracks come out of there and both sides. And I don't know if you've ever watched any of the videos when I talk about Strat style guitars and the stresses that you get in the right angle joins down here. They always, the stress is always shed through cracking into the corner of the corner of the angle. And so here we have another corner in the guitar, and somewhere this guitar has been banged either on the head or the bottom, but either which way there's been a force applied across that's expressed itself through that joint, and with the result that this isn't getting in the way of the camera, that's probably better. Yeah, with the result that it's got two little hairline cracks here. They're very minor and they're very stable, but it's just one of those things that's quite interesting to note when you get a good close-up look at these things. Otherwise, there's no problem. The neck is firmly glued in place here. There's no cracking here, which is great. So Malcolm's got a real beauty of a guitar here. Haven't heard it yet, and it has got a nice action already, but he's already checked and there are some uneven frets, so we'll take care of those, and we'll also repolish and make these frets as good as they can be and restring with slightly lighter strings, which is his preference. We'll also, on this one, we're going to adjust the height over the first string, because although it's not currently causing noticeable intonation problems as far as he's concerned, it's still a little higher than he'd like. So we'll go down to something like 0.3 of a millimetre over that first fret. And what's also interesting, and I'm not sure, but I'll do a bit of research, is the material that the fretboard is made out of. Malcolm says it's not actually wood, it's some sort of wood-based resin, which would be really interesting to have a look at. And so I'll do a bit of internet looking up. So there we have it, the Hagstrom Super Swede Weekend Au Pair Blonde Matron. Yeah, coming through the Reloved Guitars workshop, and with some attention paid to the rattling jack socket there, for which I have invested in one of StewMac's quality tools. Instead of buying a cheap version, I bought a decent version, and it's this. All it is a little tool that you can put into the jack socket, and you can turn it to grip the socket on the inside, so it holds it steady when you can use a spanner to tighten up the outside, and that avoids the danger that you often have of people trying to tighten it up, the jack socket, and in fact the whole internal mechanism spinning around to the point where you either weaken at best, or worse, you snap the connections on the inside. So this, you have to have a tool to make sure you do that. On guitars that you can get into the cavity at the back, sometimes you can go in there, and if you're really careful you can hold it with the pliers and do the outside one. That's what you would do if you didn't have that. But on some guitars, for example semi-acoustics and full acoustics, both which I have in the house, if you've got a loose jack plug socket, there's no way you're going to get in through the sound hole, or if it's a semi-acoustic, you're not going to get anywhere near it with the F holes in the front of the guitar to somehow hold the inside structure of that to stop it spinning. So a necessary tool, a necessary, not an unnecessary, a necessary tool, which I'm sort of just wedging there for future reference. So as time goes by, we'll probably get more of those great StewMac things. So I'm under a bright white light here, but I don't mind that, as long as it works for you to see what's going on here. And I might actually learn to live with that dazzling brightness, providing it works for the viewer to see. I get a feeling that's probably about the way it should be. We'll see how it comes out on video. So, if we're starting with this lovely Hagstrom, a couple of things I just need to check before we start. First of all, I'm going to get a couple of blocks of foam so I can support the neck as and when I need to. I just want the tuners. I don't want the tuners grounding out on the floor. Yeah, so a couple of things I really want to know first of all, and one of them is the height that the action's currently set at. I mean, we're going to go as low as we can go for Malcolm on this one, but currently the lighting's all wrong for this. But currently that's looking at 1.6 millimeters at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. Okay, 22. So 1.6 at the 22nd fret, which I can write down on a bit of paper. Any time. It's always useful to keep check of various things. So Hagstrom is actually it's more like 1.75 at 22nd. And for interest, the bit that just point you down a bit, the bit that Malcolm was particularly interested in is the height of the action. Now this is with the neck pressing down, so it's not going to be entirely accurate, but I'm just going to start. So it's over 0.5 for sure. We can probably go to 0.6 straight away and see if that's got any clearance there. And again, this is probably, because it's laid flat, the gap will be, that's 0.6. Because it's laid flat, it's reducing the gap. In fact, if we did it at playing position, we'd find that gap is actually a bit larger. We can demonstrate that in a minute. So I've gone to 0.7. Okay, so 0.7, it's between 0.6 and 0.7, and on most of the guitars I do, so at the first fret it's 0.6 to 0.7, and most of the guitars that I set up that come through here that end up being about 0.25. So they're all tiny measurements, they're all tiny distances, but comparatively, if we're at 0.6, then we're at least twice the height that we'd ideally want to make this a really easy guitar to play and to avoid any intonation problems at this end. Okay, so I'm just going to keep a note of those, keep them off to one side, because I want to just make sure that I know that I'm making sure that I improved it. Now, again, as I said, taking the gravity off that neck, what we would find is that that gap will actually open up a little bit more, because when the gravity's on the neck, it pulls it this way, and that flattens out the gap. But we can say that it's at least 0.7 when it's going to need to be 0.25. And we can either do that checking. I tend to do, when it comes to these gaps, because it's not absolute, I don't really, it's not really, I haven't read a book and the manufacturer says it's got to be 0.3, and therefore it makes a hell of a difference if I do it lying flat or up. If that was the case, if I was aiming for a manufactured specified 0.3, then it would really make sense to be aiming for 0.3 here. What I know works is to aim for 0.3 in the guitar in this position. That actually means that when you take the pressure off the neck, it's probably more like 0.4 or 0.25 to 0.35. But the point being is that it's the right sort of distance. So we're doing a kind of relative thing here rather than an absolute thing. And before people sometimes get really angry about, there are certain times where, of course, putting it in this position is the correct position. Putting it in that position puts either gravity for the neck when it's leaning off here free, or when I put it under pressure there, it counters the gravity and possibly goes the other way. But actually, in my experience, it counters it almost entirely right. If these were absolutes and we had to get them to absolute tolerances, then these things would matter massively. But because, as I said, they're relative, I know that a 0.25 to 0.3 reading here on a guitar that's like this, done in this position, translates into a very playable action with good sounding intonation and very clear notes in this position. So I'm doing it on a relative scale, if you get what I'm saying. Okay, so having done that, I'm going to keep the camera in this mode. I'm going to do some sort of moving around really to just try and see what things look like from different angles, since we've got a bit of freedom to rove. I just have to be kind of cautious that what we don't end up is getting glare from the lights. But okay, so here we are. I'm going to take off these strings now, which are all pretty good condition. But they're actually a bit heavier gauge than Malcolm would like. So what we're doing here is we're just reducing this down to, we're going to take it down to a set of 9s, which he's more comfortable with. Now, in a sense, these would be potentially savable to reuse on another guitar if we had to. Sometimes they're quite useful to use on guitars, rather not to put them on a customer's guitar, but sometimes you need a set of spare strings to put a neck under pressure to test it for its relief, and then to take those off again and put new strings on. So always having a spare set is useful. And if you're going to put them under pressure, and if your final string gauge is going to be 9, then say 10 for example, a set of 10s, then you'd be smart to use a test set of 10s to check the neck relief and the impact that those strings have on the neck relief. And if you're going to use 9s, you might as well have a spare set of 9s for the same purpose. Okay. I've got quite a few kicking around, but I'm not sure I've got a easily identified set of 10s, so I might try and keep these as a workshop set of 10s rather than cut any wires off. Now, what's happening physically, I think, is when you take the pressure off the neck, the strings obviously are slack, but it means that the massive pressure that the neck was under is also now removed, and so that you'll see that the profile of the neck will change just simply because of the lack of, well, it should change because of the lack of string pressure on it. And so we're not too bothered what it was before. The reason why we're not too bothered what it was before is because we're going to reset it anyway when it comes to the time when we've installed new strings, and we're going to set it according to the pressure exerted by those strings. And since we're changing from 10s to what will be in future 9s, the amount of tension is going to be different, so it's not really relevant what the neck relief was doing previously, other than out of interest, just for general interest's sake. Okay, so I'm taking out, I don't even know if you can see, but hey, now you can, it's that easy. I'm taking out, that's one of the difficulties of reusing strings, is that as soon as you start pulling them back out of something, because they're all coiled from having been around the peg, they tend to catch on everything and anything. The bass strings tend to come out quite easily, but all the rest are just dying to get snagged up in everything. So I don't know if you can see there, but you can see the interesting shaped block, the anchor block, where these strings, or the tail piece, if you like, where these strings attach. And they're staggered in an interesting way. I'm not sure yet whether that's just stylistic or whether there's a function. I'm sure that Hagstrom would tell me, or they may well suggest there is a really good reason for this. Since these strings then go over at the tunematic bridge, which is what really defines the tail end of the guitar, I'm not sure I can see how these staggered tail blocks really have any significant impact on this, other than just looking good, which they do, because they're unusual. Guitar sliding away from me. Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks since I've been out here doing this, and thankfully we've got a slight warm spell. Even though it's just about almost December, it suddenly seems to have gone a bit warmer, and as such it's not half as difficult to be out here as I was expecting it to be. I was really thinking I was going to be freezing to death. Right, a little tug just to get those through, because these are almost impossible to bend by hand. If you want to try and straighten these out, you'd be trying for some time. Okay, so there's my beautiful naked Swede. Oh, this is going to get out of hand. And now I've got a set of 10s, sort of workshop 10s for using, and I'm just going to put a bit of tape on them and just mark them up as such, so that I know what they are if I want to use them for loading up a guitar in future. And then I'm going to hang them from some likely looking place, which pretty much always ends up with me losing them or them getting caught up in something else. So 10s for neck loading, I'll call it. Okay, useful. Keep them. I'll just hoist them over here with all the others that aren't in sets, which they should be really. Okay, so straight away, what have we got? We've got no damage to the surrounds of this thing. It's in good nick. We've got the very clean looking tunematic bridge. And this one is quite simple. It hasn't even got the retaining bar, but I will remember, and this is something that is always worth doing as well. If you're going to take off, or you're going to do more than one guitar, just make sure you know which way the tunematic bridge is oriented. So I know there's the pickup and there's the bridge, and I know on this one the screws are facing the pickup. Okay, I'm just drawing it out that way So that just lets me know which way the owner prefers it, because it's actually kind of immaterial which way round it is. So I'm just doing that so that I don't accidentally put it back the wrong way and the customer gets miffed. As I say, in my experience, it doesn't make a difference. It has no material effect. And actually I find it easier to normally access when it's that way around, but on this guitar there's this great big block in the way, so that isn't going to be the case. So unusually for me, I'm going to agree with everyone else this time, and I'll say that on this guitar it's better facing this way. So I'm just going to take these things that could be loose and I'm going to put them safely into a container. Anything I take off here I want to put safe. And just noting if there's any unusual abnormalities about these things that I need to pay close attention to. Just for interest's sake, I'm going to take, let's see if my screwdrivers will do the job or if they're too fine. I'm just going to take this little casing off, if it's easy enough to do. Just have a look. It's quite tightly screwed on, so I'm just going to be very careful and get the right, make sure we've got exactly the right bit for doing it. I don't want it, oops, spitting it out. Yeah, let's have a quick look under there. That's quite tight. Yeah, just to see how it's constructed. Again, this is going through the perspex into the body of the guitar, so it's a structural piece. It's actually coming up off there. That's okay. We'll just have a look underneath. Nice and loose. I think the first one is bringing the plate up with it. The second one is the screws coming out on its own, like nature intended it to do. Okay, quite long screws, so it's a really firm anchor point into the body. And we're up and out. Alright, so these are quite particular. Again, having not researched this guitar, these are also then screwed straight into the body, so that's quite okay. That's an interesting little bit of research for me. So I'm going to make a guess because I haven't researched this, but look at these blocks here. We've got perspex block which is actually I thought it would come up, but it's not coming up. And the reason it's not coming up is each one of these string anchors staggered, and they're really staggered. There's a reason why they're staggered. It's not because of anything to do with the length. They're staggered because they need the width to get two screws through that straight into the body of the guitar, and there wouldn't be enough room if they were all in line. Okay, so they're giving two screws for each string. So each string is anchored down into this body of the guitar, and I will guess that the purpose of this is to add a significant increase the resonance of the string. So its fixed point is really in tight contact and firm resonant contact with the body of the guitar. Then it goes over the tunematic bridge, which then holds the string. The points of the bridge hold the string, and the solidity of that is fixed by the two poles here. But this is all about trying to get the maximum resonance out of these strings, I would suspect, because there's no other function of that. But that's why they bolt straight into the guitar. And they're staggered because if they didn't stagger them, then you'd have to have one single piece, and you'd have to have a screw. In fact, you couldn't get the same number of screws. You'd have to have a much lighter fixture point, and you wouldn't get one for each string. So there'd just be a bar, and you'd be trying to get it with the single piece, and a smaller number of screws. So very interesting. Not seen that before. But yeah, very solidly fixed, which is cool. I did say that there was an issue with the thing is called a jack plug input, and while we're here, let's take care of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an adjustable spanner, or I could try and find the exact socket, which I can never quite work out, but I'll grab a handful and see if we can do that. So first of all, partly too, unless you've got a ring spanner, you won't get down into, you won't get the correct socket down into that space. Actually, I happen to have just got the right one. Okay, so the idea of this piece here, let's pull up power. Let's get you up to where you can see it. I'm trying to avoid getting dazzled, but if we come up a bit, here, bring it to here. So what we're looking at is we've got a tool that if I know I'm going to tighten up the outside nut this way, then I want to put this tool into the socket and just turn to the left, the counterclockwise, right? But I don't want to do it yet. I want to take this off. Is that the right size? Yeah, it is. I put the spanner over this first, then put this in, and then turn it counterclockwise. Now that will seize the internal part, and then I use my spanner. I don't know if you can see very well, but I'm using the spanner now to turn and tighten in the clockwise direction whilst it's over the thing, and then I just slacken that off and take it out, and that now has tightened up that socket beautifully with absolutely no risk of the internal part spinning. So that is why you pay $36 to StewMac for a piece like that. Apparently you can get similar things a little bit cheaper, but who would want to do that when you can buy it off the guys who probably do it the best, which is StewMac. They are very good, and the reason I continue to buy from them is because, by all accounts, if you ever need their customer service, the legend on the street has it, or word on the street has it, that their customer service is great. So to me, that's the difference between why I'll pay $36 US from them rather than maybe $20 from another supplier who I don't know anything about. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything. Oh, well, am I? Yes, I am, because this is inert. I'm just going to give this fingerboard a quick clean down with naphtha. It's very. It looks like ebony. I think it's been deliberately made to have a sort of an ebony look and feel. Although Malcolm, being an ebony fan, although he hasn't said it's ebony, so we can presume that it isn't. I'm sure he would have told me straight away. Point down. There we go. Just get some of the fingerprints off. The usual thing. It's a new guitar. You can see there's quite a bit of grime coming off. New guitar, and it's always a nice thing to do to take off previous owners' genetic traces. And start again, putting your own down. Some guitars this can naphtha is really good. It doesn't, on most guitars, it doesn't produce any drying effect on the fingerboard. Sometimes when a fingerboard is really filthy, it's necessary to go at it with some very fine grit sandpaper to really get rid of the horrible residue from ages gone by. And in that case, it can have quite a drying effect on the fingerboard, and that's about the only time personally that I will end up using oil. Something like whatever, lemon oil or something like that. That's about the only time I'll use that, which will be to kind of hydrate's not the word, but bring a bit of life back to a dried out fingerboard if I've had to do sanding on it. But this one doesn't have anything that permanently ground into it. It is an incredible finish, and it has a slight sparkle to it. There's something about it which is slightly reflective, but I can see why Malcolm likes it, because it's quite similar to his beloved ebony. Okay, so we have a nice clean fingerboard to move on from, and then really what we're going to want to do next is, before we do anything else, we're going to take a look at the the truss rod and also the bend in the neck. Right, this is not the droid we're looking for. And this one may well be. No, that's not. Yeah, we're going to look at the relief in the neck, and before we do any fret work, we're going to want to set that to completely flat, as flat as we can get it. And we're going to, when we do that, when we do any truss rod adjustment, we're going to make sure that we're sighting down the side of the neck with the neck held in sort of side-on vertical in the sort of playing position, because you know, when you're looking at a neck to see whether it's bent or it's level, you have to recognise that it is subject to gravity, and that it will look different if the headstock is pulling the neck down, or if it's going sideways on, it will have a different effect. I'm just going to have a look down here, see where our truss rod is. What we're looking at, okay, it's down there, quite a way in, which is unusual. Now, so first thing I'm going to do at the moment is just have a sight down, look down, just try and get some of this glare away from things. I'm going to have a quick look down the neck at this point and see what we've got. And down this way as well. Actually, that's pretty straight. That's not bad. It's got the tiniest bit of concavity in it still on that side, and potentially the minutest bit of concavity in this side. So might want to just therefore do the minutest adjustment before we get on to doing anything with our fret leveling work or any work on the frets at all. So the way this guitar is built, it sort of needs resting at different places. It's got a little step under here. So it's got a tiny bit of concavity, and I want to bring that out. That means I'm going to tighten the truss rod ever so slightly. It says my chart that I have to refer to every time because I'm so hopeless at remembering. I get it wrong every single time and look like a complete chump. So I'm going to try and find which one of these actually fits this. It's very difficult in small space. Okay, so we're going to go look. Oh well, that's helped me out. We're going to work on that anyway. Tiny adjustment there. So that's interesting. The way this is configured is the truss rod adjustment spot is so close to the it's partially hidden by the nut, so any attempt to adjust it means the nut pops out, which is okay. We can just glue that back in when we come to work on it. Now I may have gone a fraction convex now. We may have to go slightly back. Actually that side's spot on. That side's spot on. And this side is very, 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 very close. No, it's still okay. That's still got the tiniest bit of relief, and it's coming out actually. Yeah, that is pretty close. I don't think you can get much better than that actually. So that's not under gravitational pull, or so it is, but it's sideways. But notice we're checking it when it's side on. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for a minute or two, just to let it catch up, because the truss rod was quite stiff, and I don't want to do it again. And it's so close to being spot on. I don't want to do it anymore and have to come backwards again. So I'm just going to give it a minute or two. And then the next stage of this then will be to use masking tape to mask off the fretboard and any other exposed parts of this guitar that may be at risk when we're doing the fret leveling work. Okay, so we'll stop it for a second and come back into a couple of minutes, and we'll do mask it off, and then we'll do the fret level checking and see if Malcolm's 7 or 8 uneven frets is still the same, or whether that's changed at all by the fact that we've levelled the neck, or we've taken the strings off and therefore the neck is now perfectly level. I think because Malcolm would have measured it with the strings on. Okay, so back in a sec. Right, okay, so what we're going to do next is to take our trusty masking tape, and we're going to, I can do over the edge now, I've got freedom. I'm going to mask off the fretboard, and this is such a nice fretboard, but all fretboards are important. They're all equal, all created equal, because they're all essentially the heart of your guitar. So if you're going to take care over anything, it is take care over the neck, the fretboard and the frets on your guitar. The neck is the heart of it. So we just, first of all, masking off using chunks of tape in its original thickness, and we're just putting it straight on, making sure that it butts right up to the edge of the frets. And but you can anticipate pretty soon that we're going to have to cut up some thinner strips, because otherwise we're going to run over the top of the frets. So I'm going to switch off to do that. I won't bore you with that, but just to show you, when we have our tape, once it's around there, I'm going to pinch it off all around the back so that we have a bunch of tags here, which makes it easy to take it all off later when we finish doing the frets. Okay, so I'm going to get a little cutting board. I'm going to move this guitar out of the way, and I'm going to use my cutting board to prepare ready a whole set of pieces of masking tape. And you can see I've been doing similar in a previous job, and I'm just going to cut it all up to a set of thicknesses and lengths which I've kind of pre-discovered from experience works, and so would you if you do this more than once. But the bottom line is you need to have a series of different thickness bits of masking tape to do this job. You could do it as you go along, bit by bit, but it would take you forever. So my kind of advice is to be a bit methodical about it, and I tend to put out 4 strips. I do the first few as you just saw with the full width stuff, then I tend to put out 4 strips on this piece of cutting board, and I cut 2 of those strips cut down the middle, so into 2 parts, half widths, and then I cut the other 2 into 1/3 widths, or cut it into 3, and that gives me more than enough to complete masking the fretboard of this guitar, and it gives me a little bit left over, so that if during the process or the work, this isn't really a good way of attaching this. I was hoping to find somewhere I could put that tool. Maybe it will be just up here for the time being. Yeah, if at any point during the process you find that the paper is lifting off the fingerboard, then having a few more strips ready cut is a really good way of encouraging yourself to stop and cover the fingerboard back up. And so, you know, the key thing here is don't ever run the risk of just carrying on with exposed fingerboard, because that will cost you somewhere along the line. You're either going to end up with sandpaper marks or fret file marks, and it will spoil the whole thing. So I will stop in a second, save you the drudgery, but you can see I'm going to get a straight edge, and I'm going to take the time to cut these pieces of masking tape ready in pre-arranged thicknesses, and then I know that I've got that to hand to completely mask off and protect this precious fretboard, which as you can see is a beautiful fretboard, and it would ruin the whole deal if I were to give back a customer's guitar with a fretboard that looked or felt worse than the condition it was when they brought it to me. Okay, so you can see I'm taking the time here, fiddly and boring though it is, I'm taking the time to get these things pre-cut. Sometimes this goes off on its own, but I've got enough. Yeah, pre-cut this so that we've got the right stuff. Okay, so I'll come back to you when I have miraculously covered the whole of the fretboard on this lovely Hagstrom blonde Super Swede. Hey folks, welcome back. So here we have the nicely taped up Hagstrom. Okay, so everything protected, and particularly all the fretboard protected, all the fretboard protected, but also the body here, so that whenever I'm doing any work with either the fret file or the fret crowning file, this isn't going to be in any danger, and we're making sure that the finish stays in good nick. Okay, so I guess to introduce to you, if you haven't seen this before, the purpose of what we're doing now, we've got this guitar ready to, we're aiming to level the frets. Okay, so all guitars coming out of factories and shops have uneven frets. Very few have very few uneven frets. They're rare that a guitar has no uneven frets. The majority have at least 50, sometimes 60, 70% of the frets uneven relative to each other. It's not an absolute, again, it's relative. But relative unevenness is what matters, because if the frets are relatively uneven relative to each other, what happens is you get choking problems, that notes are choked off or play high notes too early. You get buzzing because the frets stick up in the path of the string when you're fretting it somewhere else. And basically, the upshot is that the severity of your fret unevenness dictates the minimum action you can set. So you have to stop lowering your action at a point you start to encounter the problems caused by the frets, and most people then have to back off a little bit and set the action high enough to avoid problems that are caused by the uneven frets. So if you're going to set up a guitar, as we're doing here, for us the first thing to do, the most important thing to do, is to level the frets and start with the best possible basis for doing a setup. So everything after that, how we set the action, we have a lot more flexibility because we've leveled the frets. So we've got much more, a greater opportunity to lower the action, which is always pleasing for a guitarist. Not too many people want really high action. And it also allows us then to lower the action. Oh, hello, Maurice. Maurice, if you come here, you have to go here. Okay, you go there. Yeah, it also allows us to lower the action at the nut, making a more playable guitar as well. So I have to say, here we don't ever do a setup without doing a fret level. And there's two reasons for that. One is that there's no point, as I said, for the reasons I just said. And the second one is there is never a guitar that's come through. We've never seen a guitar through here that doesn't have uneven frets. So you can guarantee, perhaps apart from a handmade guitar maybe, that pretty much 100% of the guitars we've seen, all 55 that we've done, probably more actually, certainly the 55 reloved guitars that have come through here, every single one of them has between, at best, 20%, and that was incredibly rare, and most, worst, 90%. So quite substantially uneven frets for most guitars. And if you kind of ask yourself why they do that, why are they like that? Well, clearly it doesn't make economic sense for the manufacturers to take care of it in the factory, and it also doesn't make economic sense for the retailer to take care of it either at the online retail distribution centre or in the high street shop where they're all hung up and displayed. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a £2,000 Gibson or a £200 Squire, or even a £100 Court or some such Rockwood. They all have uneven frets. So whilst other people do things called setups without doing fret leveling, we always do fret leveling. So that's what we're doing here. And the fret leveling has three stages. And the first stage is to level the frets. The second stage is to reprofile the frets, which is to reshape them once we've leveled them, because leveling them puts a flat surface on them. And then the third part is to polish them up to a shiny playing surface again. without reducing the height of the frets in any way. And that's the real tricky thing. If you're going to such length of leveling the frets to make sure they're all relatively level, the last thing you want to do in the next two steps is to create any more unevenness. That would be kind of totally counterproductive. So the process we're going to go through here allows us to level the frets and to reprofile and polish them in a way that retains the levelness right the way through to the end, where you've got a shiny set of frets that you can then restring. You'll see that this process, well, you won't see because I cut it a little bit, but this process, without talking through it, takes about an hour and a half, an hour and a quarter, hour and a half typically. So you can imagine, you can start to think why it isn't done in the shops or in the factories. Although somebody in a discussion forum the other day said something like, well, given the, they pay the tiny wages they pay to people out in Indonesia or China where these things are made, surely another hour and a half's work would barely add a fraction to the price. I don't know. I really can't tell. I just think the margins must be really tight, because I can't see any reason why you wouldn't take care of these frets. But there's some reason why they don't. It's not because they can't, because we're going to do it. But I can't think of another way to do it other than the way we're doing it here. I can't even imagine a machine doing it very effectively either, even if you had a big manufacturing plant. Anyway, so enough of that. So here we go into stage 1 of 3. Stage 1 is levelling the frets, and just for the fun of adding more entries to our leaderboard of shame, which is falling apart a bit. But we've got a leaderboard of shame over here, which I can give you a quick look at. Apologies if you're watching this. Hey, that's important. Don't do that, Maurice. That's my really important. Tells me which way to turn the Allen key for the truss rod. You got hooked up now, you silly creature. Come here. There you go. Silly boy. Yeah, apologies if you've seen this before, but this is the leaderboard of shame, and might catch your interest to know that down here there's really expensive guitars like Bernie, like the Ibanez, 70%, 75% of uneven frets, good quality guitars, vintages. Some of the good quality ones up here, Charvel, San Dimas, that's only got 25% uneven frets. But there's no Jackson, Adrian Smith, SDX, 40%. There's not a lot of logic to it, but you can see that the bulk of guitars fall in the sort of 50 to 75% range. But you've got a vintage SG Cherry down there at 90% of the frets are uneven relative to each other. So that's pretty harsh going. So yeah, and I have to say, not one single guitar has come through without frets being uneven. So the first thing I'm going to do is, and this, you don't have to do this yourself, but I'm going to do it just so that we can make an entry on our fret leaderboard of shame, and that is to do a check and mark which frets are even and which aren't. So I'm going to use a 3-sided piece of metal, and I'm going to place that across 3 frets at a time, and of course the length of the sides changes to allow me to continue to check up here when the frets are closer together. So starting down here, I put it across 3 frets, and I try to rock over the middle one, and if I can rock over the middle one and I'll hear a clicking noise and feel clicking, then it will tell me there is the frets, either one of the frets on either side is low or the fret in the middle is high. And remember, I said it's relative, so if a fret is actually lower, then it means that is the one in the middle is relatively higher than the lower fret. So now there's a tiny little bit there on this fret, so I'm just going to move on. Here comes Malcolm. I keep doing this, Malcolm. I keep calling my cat your name. Here comes Maurice. Maurice and Malcolm. Malcolm was over for a cup of tea and to drop his guitars earlier, and now Maurice is getting me to mix his name up with Malcolm. Okay. Third fret, sorry, is got pretty high all the way across. Now if I could get to my pen, Saul. Maurice, I should never have called him Maurice. It's too close to Malcolm. Yeah, that's a really high one, and then there's a bit more on the next fret. Kind of hard with you in a way. Thank you. Okay, so little bits here and there, but that third fret is quite extreme. And then a little bit rocking there. So, as I say, I'm marking up the bit that indicates as being higher than the surrounding frets, but we don't know whether it's because the surrounding frets are lower in some places. All we know is it's rocking, it's able to rock, and therefore the three of them, the cluster of three, are not level somewhere. If you want to try and work out which it is, I kind of pretend there's an absolute and try and work out which one's actually low and which ones are actually high off some imaginary baseline. You're welcome to try and do it, but I really suggest you'll drive yourself mad trying to do it. It's not worth it. All you need to know is the levelness relative to the nearby frets, because it's that relativeness that's going to cause the problem, not some notional absoluteness, because that's a real problem. Absolute in relation to what? There's no kind of baseline that we'd be measuring it from. So Malcolm did measure this, and he told me that, or he checked this, and he told me there were 7 or 8 uneven frets that he turned up, and I would have to concur. Maurice has tucked himself into a little cosy space, haven't you? I'm going to move somewhere else so I can carry on. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, hang on. Hold on. Sorry, I just didn't mean to hurt your foot. You might get a lot of bum and tail in this film. That's because it's a Swedish Ultra Swede blonde Hagstrom film. Apologies if that was an off-colour remark. Excuse me. Wet nose! Ooh, you are funny. Right. Okay, so we know we've got 22 frets, but only 20 of them are checkable. And of those 20, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 are to some degree uneven. 14 out of 20 is a good, healthy 70%. So, you know, good quality guitar, Hagstrom. You'd kind of hope it would be a bit better. I have to say, although numerically it's 70%, there are only 2 or 3 frets with significant unevenness that, and you might see them if the cat wasn't in the way. There's some furry. That's nice, yeah. Let's just tip over the parts of the guitar. Let's just put that out of the way. Oh no, I've lost my thing. It's no longer there. It's now here. God, it's all changed. Yeah, I'll let Maurice has now settled in for the evening. Maurice. You're a handsome fellow, aren't you? But you are getting in the way at the moment. So could we put you down here on a stool? You come down here. Or are you just going to stay there and do what you want? I think that's probably the long and short of it. He's going to stay there and do what he wants, but I'm going to put him down there and see if he likes the radiator a bit. Right, just get warm down there and stay there. Okay, so we've done our measurement, 70%. I'd hope that, you know, when you go out away from the mass-produced ordinary guitars, you might find a better reading, but it's still quite a lot. And that one, and that one are all the way across, and the rest of them have some in the middle and some at the edges. But, you know, it registers 70% uneven, so it will go on the leaderboard of shame as slightly worse of centre. Okay, so now let's forget, you wouldn't necessarily do that check. You wouldn't have to if you were going to use a fret leveling file like this, which does all the frets at once. So what you might then do if you're going to start now is you get your marker pen and you carefully mark all the way across the top of the frets. Now I say carefully because when you put masking tape down on this fretboard, it has a dreadful habit of acting like a capillary action thing. So if you touch the edge of the paper with this pen, it will suck the ink underneath the paper and spread it out, and very quickly you'll have it all over the fingerboard, which you're trying to keep clean and safe from damage. So, you know, if you press too hard down and this marker pen connects with the edge of paper, you'll be sorry. You'll be trying to remove it, and it won't come off with solvent. Bizarrely, it seems to have to be sanded off, and that takes a bit of time because you have to then bring the surrounding area back up to a shine and so on. So you don't want it. Okay. So now I've marked up the frets, and the reason I mark them up is so that I am able to see what the file has or hasn't touched as we go forward. So I'm going to now kind of zoom in a bit more, and what we're going to do is I'm just going to start with the put my special kind of reading glasses on so I can see a little bit more clearly on this bit, and I'm going to use the fret file to start over on the right hand side, and I'm just going to run the full length of the guitar, all the frets. So I'm just tipping over the edge slightly to make sure I get the curved edge, and then I come in towards the middle a bit, and I'm going all the way from one end to the other. Allows the to rock, and you mark the fret adjacent to it. It's high, but actually it's this one that's low. But you don't have to have worked that out, because this tool is doing all the frets together at the same time, and in doing so it is ensuring that all frets are levelled simultaneously in relation to each other. Okay, so I'm just going to go back the other way and up to the end. Now I'm going to just brush off the little metal shavings at this point. It's alright, Maurice, you don't have to breathe it in. So now looking back on this, I can see that pretty much everything has been levelled, except I'm still not touching a tiny spot there, a significant spot there, one or two little spots here and here. So I've got a little bit more to do to connect with those low parts. So I'm going to turn the file around and run this way and make sure I'm getting everything at this end, because sometimes it's quite hard to get this end when you start at that end, so it's good to come the other way down the fretboard. So just having a quick look again, is there anything now untouched at all? No, everything's been hit by the file. There are no we've cleared away the low spots, and we are pretty much ready to move on. I'm just going to give it one or two more little pushes at this end just to contact the top of these first few frets. Okay, so I've brushed all that away, and that's the fret leveling done. And the thing that I recommend if you do this, the next thing you do is just get your fret rocker tool back out and go right over immediately the places that you had it listed as high or too low. Now this one was significantly high, and I'm still finding a relative high spot there, and that means it would make sense to just come down there again. I know it's in the middle of this one, so Again, I'm going to just do a stop, go back and do a check. Still got some high spot in the middle of that. Now, it's still high relative to everything around it, so I'm going to go back there and I'm going to run the risk of taking some more off in pursuit of getting this level. Because there's no point in doing this and not ending up with level frets. All you'll have done is just worn away some of your fret material, and it's the ones that aren't level are the ones dictating the play. So you might feel like this is extreme, and why should we have to do all of these just to iron out those particular problems? Well, that's what we're doing it for. Okay, we're doing it so that the uneven ones are leveled, taken care of, so that everything is level when we put this back together again. We're almost there. Going to come at it once the other way. What you'll find is the ones that you marked up as particularly high, you'll notice most of the time that they've got more metal taken off them than the other ones, and that's how it has to be. That's unfortunately the only way you're going to achieve that level. I've probably mentioned this loads of times, but if you're a newcomer to my videos, if you've seen these before, you'll know that I don't recommend hammering frets to level them. Some people resort to that as a way of evening out or taking care of a single fret that stands out. The truth is, I've never found a single fret that stands out. I find always a set of frets, like we've just done. And that aside, the idea of hitting a fret seems completely counterproductive because it's totally uncontrolled. If you think about, just use logic to think about the way these frets are put in place. They're the fingerboard has a series of slots sawn into it to a certain depth, and into those slots are squeezed, pressed, if you like, these frets, which are already slightly curved to match the radius shape of the fingerboard. And so those frets are pressed into these slots, which I believe are glued, and so pressing them in presses them into the trench, if you like, or the sawn slot, presses them in, and then the glue sets and they stay there. If one isn't pressed in correctly and it sets all too high, and it's about a tenth of a millimetre too high, for example, then the idea of hitting it, to me, logically doesn't seem to make sense, because if you hit it, first of all, there's a number of things here. First of all, the wood is springy, so it's liable to bounce. The force is going to press the fret into the wood, and it's liable to recoil and bounce out. Secondly, the fret itself is springy because it's bent in that shape, so you hit a shape like that, it's going to flatten out and then recoil. And thirdly, you're going to probably break the seal with the glue, which is probably set, but then if you hit it with sharp impact, it's potentially going to crack and lose its stop working. And then finally, I suppose, is if you hit this T-shaped fret with its tang that sticks into the slot, if you give that a good bash, probably all you've done is bounce the fret out of the slot, but also in doing so, the impact will have driven the tang further into the wood for a second and made the hole bigger, so you've actually just made it looser. So I can't see any smart reason for hitting these things with a hammer. That's just why I don't do it, okay? I mean, if you want to do it and it works for you. The fifth reason, I suppose, is probably the most important one of all, though it doesn't sound like it, and that is, even if it did work and that you cured the problem, you've got no idea how much it's gone in. You just know it's lower than it was, but has it created a problem in relation to the next fret? Who knows? So it's totally unscientific or uncontrollable. So this way, having taken material off the top, we now know we've brought everything down to the right level. Okay, next stage in this process is you take your pen out and you go over all these frets again, marking them with marker pen, again making sure you don't spill this black marker into or along the edge of the paper. So a light touch at this point is really important. concentrate on just keeping it on the top of the paper, top of the frets. And this time the marker pen serves a different purpose, and this time we're going to use it to tell us when we've reshaped the fret and when we should stop before we run the risk of lowering the fret anymore. Because the one thing from this moment on now, we don't want to take any more height off these frets, or if we do, we take exactly the same amount of height off each one. And so we use, as we're into, now we're going to reshape the fret, so instead of being a flattened thing, each fret now is going to get reshaped into the proper shaped curve. And to do that we're going to use this fret crowning file, diamond edged file. It's a concave file which will fit over the top of the fret, and as it fits over the top of the squared off fret, just imagine it's like that, it's going to square off the shoulder, the pointy bits first, and then it's going to round it off into a nice curve. But if we kept on going, we'd reduce the fret right down to the wood, so we don't want to do that. And this marker pen helps us to know when to stop. So when I start working on the fret edges to start to round it off, the first thing that happens is I'll be able to see the shiny edges that the curved surface here is making on the shoulders, if you like, of this fret. And as those shiny edges increase in size, what I know is that I'm wearing away more of the obstructing shoulder, or the squareness of the fret, and getting closer to a round fret. And so my objective when I'm doing this is to end up with a fret that has a tiniest thin black line running down the middle of it, but most of the shoulder of it is shiny metal where I've taken it down. And that tells us, we know at that point we've got a correctly rounded off profiled fret, but we've also know that we haven't taken it any lower than it was before we started. And we can see that little strip, well, I can see that little strip running right down the middle, and I know that I've reprofiled the shape because I can see the shiny metal coming off where it's the file is bitten away. But it leaves that central line down the middle, whose purpose is to tell me that it's still exactly the same height as it was when we started. And the reason I know it's the same height is because it's telling us we haven't touched the top of the fret, and so long as we haven't touched the top of the fret, we haven't lowered it any. And that's really, really critical. So that's the role that the black marker pen plays in this part of the process. Stage 2 of 3 when it comes to fret leveling. So this is going to get really boring, so I'm going to put this on hold for a minute, and I will return when I've done all of this, and we'll carry on with the third part of the process, which will be the polishing part. So see you shortly. Righty-ho, so we're still running on sound, yeah, still working. Okay, so I've done the re-profiling part of it using the fret crowning tool, and now I want to move on to the polishing stage. And the polishing stage involves some sandpaper, some micro mesh sheets, which are a set of sandpaper grades, and some patience. So let's get the things we need out. I'm going to go with 2 grades of sandpaper. Excuse me. And the sandpaper I use for this process, having practiced and experimented quite a few times. So I'm going to take this guitar off here for a minute because it's going to be in the way. Stay there. Yeah, having experimented a number of times, I'm going to know the way this works best for me, and everybody will have their own way, but I use 600 grit paper and 240 grit, and then the micro mesh papers, which are a set of grades stepping down from 1500 right the way down or up to 12,000, very, very fine. So I create myself a pile of 600 grit pieces, and I'm going to do the same with the 240s, which obviously are a lot coarser. And the challenge in this polishing part is very, very simple, but it's quite hard to achieve. And the challenge is this: when you fret level, you put a whole load of scratches of a certain size onto the frets, and of course you can't have those on the guitar if you want to play it. So the aim of all of this is to take away all of that scratching progressively and end up with a smooth fret, or all smooth frets. But it's got quite a task in front of you, so if you think about it logically, at the moment there are two kinds of scratches on this guitar. On the very top of the frets there is this scratches left by this fret leveling file, and we know they're still there because we deliberately avoided taking the tops of the frets off, so we know we've still got scratches pertaining to that on there. We also know on the sides of the files of the frets we've got scratches from this 300. I'd say let's call that 0 grit because they are huge scratches. Let's call that 300. Okay, we're now going to have to use 240 paper to take off all of the 0 stuff. At the same time, it's going to roughen up some of that, but that's okay. So we use however much of this rough stuff we need to remove basically these marks from the top of the frets. Once we've achieved that, and we have to be absolutely precise and ruthless about whether we have or not, but once we have achieved that, then we're left with a whole load of scratches made by 240 paper, which is where we use as many sheets, or as much of the 800 paper this is, as is required to remove all the scratches left by the 240. And then finally we do the same thing by just giving it a once over with all of these grades going finer and finer until we get to a polish. So the temptation is to do it quickly, and the risk is you leave tiny little nicks from this file on the frets, and even though while you're doing it everything else around what you're doing can look really smooth, where's my, oh no, oh, this is terrible, I seem to have lost my thing for a minute. Yeah, so while it's quite easy to make a mistake of thinking, because the rest of the fret looks really shiny, that you've actually achieved your objective of leveling, of shining it all up to the same level of smoothness. And what can happen is you can proceed while still having left scratches from the fret file, tiny little scratches on here. And if you proceed too quickly, all that will happen is you'll here it is. You'll end up shining up the frets with those little tiny scratches still left in place. And you'll think you've finished the job, and then you restring the guitar and you go to play it and you'll feel the scratches immediately. Even if you can't see them, the strings will pick up on them. So we've got to be incredibly disciplined at this stage here, where we go from the rough 0 grit scratches of the file through to the 240s. If we get that bit right, then we can step through and this bit is easy. So to make sure we get this process right, I always recommend using reading glasses or whatever binoculars you need, and in my case I use a magnifying glass as well. And I have a rule of thumb that says if I spot even the slightest little mark, once I've been over this a few times with the 240, I will do the whole lot again, because what we're also aiming to do here is to do as much. We're doing as when we're using the sandpaper, we're ensuring that we do everything evenly, so there's no part of it gets any more treatment than any other part. Okay, so just to get straight into it, here's how we do it. I'm going to fire away and tilt you forward so you can see. So I'm going to start with 240, knowing I've got a lot of rough stuff on there, rough scratches. I'm going to have my magnifying glass standing by, and I'm just going to use my fingers, and what I don't want to do is continue to create more of a flat spot. We've already got a flat spot, we're trying to round everything off with our hand. So I'm going to press down with my fingers and let them and the paper roll over the top of the frets like speed humps. Okay, and I'm just going to do this all the way along the fingerboard and try and give all the frets the same amount of pressure and the same amount of treatment with this sandpaper. Right to the edge, and including just over the edge, so that we're getting a nice smooth transition. Okay, and I turn the paper around. when you do this, you'll notice straight away that it pulls the abrasive off the paper and it builds up on here pretty quickly as a silvery grey dust. That's okay, that's what we're planning will happen. And so you'll see in the not too distant future I'll have used up one piece already. And what I'll probably do is just make sure I've kind of fully exhausted this piece of its abrasive abilities, and then I will switch to a new piece and come the other way so that this end gets a bit more pressure. You tend to find that the one end or the other gets a bit ignored. In this case it's usually the end where the frets are close together. Okay, so I'm switching direction at this point. Sorry, I'm bashing this around. Noise. Yeah, so I'm going to just switch direction. I'm going to come back, same grade of paper, and come back the other way. What I might do in between is, just to make it a bit easier, is I'm going to put the guitar quite low down and tip off as much of the filth as I can onto the floor. It's not great to breathe in, and it's not great to get all over your precious guitar either. Okay, so remember there's quite a bit of flex in the neck, so you don't want to press too hard. But I'm going to come back all the way now with my fingers still, trying to get my fingers to ride up and over all these frets, and I want to come all the way to the end, being careful not to run off onto the headstock and cause any surface damage there. So if you're not confident, you could mask off the headstock as well. For example, I'll quickly do it. See, if I had this a little less tied up, you could spin it round like that. So if I'm feeling nervous about that, chuck on some extra masking tape, wrap it round quickly, you know, and we just give ourselves a little bit of protection there so we can run off the end when we're running from one end to the other. And that actually feels a little bit better because I don't have to worry. And I can change hands, that's fine. But I'm still using the same principle, which is letting my fingers kind of ride up and over as much as possible, so that we, wherever possible, we avoid any chance of creating a flat spot. So if we use the block, you could guess that we'd very quickly create another flat spot. I'm also, by and large, aiming to give all parts of the neck the same amount of levelling. Now, you have to remember that this paper is quite seriously abrasive, so we don't need to do this too long. I've done two pieces now, and I'm going to stop there for a second, brush it off, and at this point I'm going to take a good look and see if we have any of those scratches left. If we have, then we carry on with the 240 paper. If we haven't, then what I suggest we do is move on to the next grade of paper. Okay, so just I do my little Clueso moment. So I'm looking for some good lighting, and I'm getting up close, and already I can see straight away on this last couple of frets I've still got some little pits, which are remnants of the scratches of the fret leveling file, and that tells me that I have not smoothed out this sufficiently using the 240 in order to feel comfortable to move on to the next level. So it's going to take at least another piece of 240 grit. There's a little couple down here as well, which is often the way you tend to get the best coverage somewhere in the middle. Okay, so sort of either end needs a little bit more attention. So I'm going to do it. I'm not going to ignore the whole neck and just stay in one place, but I know it needs a bit of extra attention, so I'm just going to even it out and move along to the rest of it, because we need them all to get the same level of treatment, so that if there is any reduction in height, they're all getting the same amount of height reduction to preserve the relative levelness. That's the game. You notice that in preparing this neck, I also covered the pickup covers here, the pickup cover, and I wound down the pickup a little bit so that it wasn't in the way of the file. There was no risk of it, the file hitting it and taking off the chrome or anything like that. So I have a suspicion that this will be okay. I think we'll be in a position to move on. And dust this off. Now, previously, in this process, in the first few months of doing this, I would, once I'd been through all the levels of paper, I would end up with using a Dremel and some what's it called? Polishing compound. And I've since moved away from doing that, and the reason for that is I've found that it doesn't need it. Yeah, it doesn't need it. In fact, it probably takes it may well be that the polishing compound takes the finish that we've achieved with the 12,000 grit and takes it back a stage, which is a bit counterproductive. So that 12,000 grit shine is pretty good. And it looks to me like it's enough. Okay, so I'm going to now move from the 240 to the 600. I think we've got everything, all the scratches out of the way. And to do this now, I'm going to moving to a block, and I'm putting the 600 paper over the block, and I'm just going to kind of let it bounce up and down between the frets. Isn't that right, Maurice? You want to come run away, that's right. So it starts to speed up a bit from this point. But when you're doing this, you're thinking about the interval between these different grades of things. So we've just gone from 0 grit, which was the file marks, to 240, which is quite a big jump, to 800, which is an even bigger jump. So get to make sure that what we do here replaces the previous grade of scratches with a new grade of scratches. And if we're sure it has, then we move on to the micro mesh paper and start that sequence. You see it's quite dirty at this stage, but quite a lot of build-up of stuff. So it's great to have the fingerboard protected. So I'm going to have another close look. And now I'm looking to see that has the quality of the scratches on here now moved to an even finer grade, and are there any noticeable nicks that look to me like they have come, or they're hangovers from the original scratches. And I have to say, right here on this end one, of all of them, I think there is. So I'm going to spend a bit more time with my fingers and some sandpaper on these end frets here, because I think we've still got a little bit of scratching left. I don't want to continue to go back to the 240 paper, because I think we've done enough with that, but I'm going to pay very close attention with this 800 paper. Sorry, it's not 600. I used to use 600, but I've gone for 800 now. So I'm just going to pay it that extra bit of time and effort here. And my fingers are probably better at doing this than that rubber thing. because the fingers the softness of your fingers expand to cover all the frets, and they kind of roll around the frets better than this rubber does, or the foam I should say. So if you really want to get this right, certainly at this stage, use the fingers as much as possible. So, you know, if in doubt, right, at this stage, don't move forward. As long as you treat them all the same at this stage, and make sure you don't concentrate on one place much more than any others, right, you can't really go wrong. At 800 grit, you're not taking that much off each time, but what you are doing is ensuring that everything is taken nice and smooth and ready to move on. So after this one, I'm going to move forward, I think, to the micromesh sequence. So I'm making sure I get everything included right the way to the end. So I'm running off onto the pickup here, but it's covered, so I'm not worried about it. I'm catching the edges a little bit so that I smooth them as well, and not leaving kind of raw scratches on the edges of the frets. Okay, and then I'm going to just have one more go now with the magnifying glass, and just really closely examine this. Maybe tilt the light around, whatever you have to do to get different perspectives. Move in and out with the magnifying glass until it's at a comfortable distance. You can't convince yourself, you can't convince yourself that you should move on here unless it really is done. It would just be counterproductive, and you'll end up coming back again. And if you see something you think's a mark or a pit or an indentation, like I just did there, stop and check it. Brush it with your finger. If it's a piece of dust, then you can carry on. Okay, I think we're okay. So I'm going to now brush. Actually, I'm not going to brush. I'm going to go straight on. I'm going to get rid of these papers out of the way. How are we doing? Yep. And I'm now going to move to the micromesh sequence, and they're really easy to use because they're in sequence. And for this, we can use the pad. And we're now going to go from 800 to 1500, which is this one. So it's going to take a couple more minutes, I think, because that's quite a big step. We don't need to use so much pressure now. So it's just keep it going up and down. Pay attention to, you know, just doing it for a couple of minutes. You've got a big step, 800 right up to 15 in one jump. So if you imagine all those scratches, you're now trying to wear them down and turn them into only 1500 grit scratches, much finer. So, if you're not making videos, by the way, you can quite easily pass the time listening to favourite music or something on the TV going in the background or whatever, radio, whatever your thing is. Of course, if you're doing it and doing commentary like this, then you can't do that. Because, I don't know if you know, but if I were to put the radio on in the background of this, then YouTube who owns YouTube, has a way of analysing music in your content, and it will check it against a database of known content. And if somebody's tune gets played in the background while I was listening to the radio doing this, then Google get on my case. And depending on what the copyright owner demands, either at best insist that I put advertising on it, which they get the revenue for. It's a condition of being able to reference that music. Or if they want to be really tight about it, they shut off the video altogether, and I'm not allowed to show it until I take off that soundtrack. So a number of times I've thought about having music playing, make this a little bit more kind of interesting. And then I've caught myself thinking, oh, this is going to cost me a load of trouble, and thought better of the idea. Okay, so I'm moving on now through the stages of the micro mesh, and you can see I can be a little bit less precious about it now. I can move quicker. Again, if you want to be absolutely precise, then stick it out and spend more time. Spend as long as you feel right. You're not going to wear the frets out to the ground with this kind of paper. Certainly not at this level of grip. And as long as you do it roughly equal across all frets, you're not going to run any risk of creating any high or low spots. But really, we are now into sort of polishing mode. Now we're going up to 3,600. I'm trying to get the most out of these papers. They last a long time, but I'm trying to sort of use different parts of them from what I normally use. It's one way of, I think it's one way of trying to get the full value up, but they're superb value anyway. They're about £9 a set, but they last a very long time. I can't count now how many guitars I will have done with this particular set. And they keep on performing, so it's great. And they cost, yeah, £9. You get nine different grades in one set. And they're fantastic for doing metal. They'll do finish. If you've got scratch or a dull spot on there, you can come back up from, I don't know, maybe 2,000 upwards through to 12,000 and bring it back to a beautiful shine. And it does lacquer, it does paint, it does metal, it does wood. So really, really handy. It's probably one of the most astonishingly useful pieces of kit in the whole of this workshop. Basically polishes anything you want. Polished the fretboards with it on guitars where they were particularly coarse and dry. I've polished up lacquer repairs that I've made on the neck, particularly on the edges of the neck, or on the neck itself where it interferes with how it feels on your skin. Filled it with new lacquer and then polished it back to a mirror smooth with micro mesh. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so you can see how dirty all of this masking tape has become throughout this whole process. Now we're on the last two papers now, and this really is absolute shining polishing coat. Now it's not abrading it as we understand it, which of course it still is, but at a level that's so fine that we won't recognise it. To us it just looks like it's shining now. And finally we round off with the 12,000 grit. Apparently the grits on these micro mesh papers are not equivalent exactly to sandpapers, but I don't know the percentage difference in these things, so it's just I just keep referring to them as grits all the same. Okay, so that is us done. We've measured for evenness. We've levelled the frets. We've reprofiled them, and we have polished them up to a high level of polish, which we are now able to restring and just play, and they will be smooth to play with. So at this point, what we're going to do is start the process of getting the guitar back into its playing condition. So the first thing we're going to do is tip it over gently. It's picked up some dirt, but we won't worry about that. We'll clean all that off in due course. But what we're doing now is taking off the masking tape. Now, so far in my experience, masking tape is pretty harmless on guitars. However, if you have a guitar with really obvious weak flaking lacquer, or the lacquer is clearly not stuck to the paint very well, then you want to be very, very careful as you remove things like masking tape, because if you've got an air gap under a badly applied finish or something like that, then it's quite possible for even masking tape to pull off that surface. That surface, by the way, would fall off anyway because of the way it's only would be that way because of a defect in the way it's been applied. But you know, once in a very long while on an old guitar, if you haven't assessed properly, you might find as you pull off the tape you may remove some lacquer. Not in this case. This is a new guitar with a modern finish. There's no reason at all to have any worries about it, but you know, just be careful. Don't be ripping it off with glee. Always consider that you're taking it off a surface that is itself fixed to another layer of surface underneath. You know, and as such, there's always a risk of, if you're too rough, you could end up regretting it. Okay, so just taking off most of these little fretboard protector strips. And the reason I made those little tabs out of them, as you can see, is I can now turn it over and go kind of back to square one and just use those tabs to quite easily pull off the strips. Some of them leave a little behind, you have to pull those off separately, but mostly it will all come off together quite easily. And you're just building up a big dirty wad of stuff as you go. So I've got quite a few guitars backed up at the moment to do. I've got this one for Malcolm. I've got one for another customer, John, on behalf of one of his guitar students. And I've got a few new ones in to redo as reloved guitars, including one I'm really keen to get a good look at and do some work on, and that's a second Sun Mustang, which is a Fender licensed Indian-made Stratocaster from the 80s. There are a couple of varieties. One is from the 90s, and the one I prefer is from the 80s. I think they're great guitars. I'm really into them, especially by the time I've given them a setup and also changed the tuners, put some decent tuners on. And I've done that to the first one I had, and I have it in the house now as a guitar that is hard to put down. So I'm going to do the second one for sale and see if I can find me somebody who appreciates it as much as I like the other one. Okay, so at this stage I'm thinking we've put quite a bit of goo onto this guitar in various different ways, so I'm going to give it a quick once over. And most of the goo will actually be on the body here where it's not been protected, and that will be gooed up from quite a bit of dust that we've picked up along the way. So I'm going to just give this sort of degunging, taking off some of that dust, and then once over here make sure there's no bits of tape left behind, onto its side, in the gap there where there's quite a bit of dust build up, gently onto its front, similar. Yeah, a few bits of masking tape that have stuck, and then once over on the back. Okay, on the other side. Now, my experience, this solvent naphtha or lighter fluid isn't the best. It doesn't shine everything up totally perfect, I have to say. You know, a clean, dry cloth is best as the final touch for that. And in a sense, you probably want to be looking at that right at the end anyway, as you take it out of the workshop and take it back to the house or whatever. But let's imagine that's what we're doing now, just to give it a sort of a quick polish down, or polish up. Get as much of the gunge off it as we can get from its last operation. So that's the fret leveling part of the job done. Typically an hour and a half. The heart of any setup now that we do. So now we're ready to restring it, put the neck under the right tension, set a useful neck relief for this guitar with the strings that we put on it, and then once we've done that, then we move into setting the bridge and the neck action, to set the playing action. And those two things together, actually three things you could say, the neck relief, the bridge action and the neck action together will give us the playing characteristics of this guitar. So again, you can see that there would be no point in just grabbing this guitar and starting to crank around with a tune-o-matic bridge and playing with the action until such times as we were absolutely confident that we got the best neck possible, the best frets possible. And just having a quick run over this, they're looking good to me. Yep, good. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to replace the. Actually, we don't need to do this yet, do we? We'll put the strings through first and then replace this bridge plate unit. And I'll give it a quick clean down while we're at it. So we'll get 9s onto this for Malcolm. And once we've got those on, then we're getting ready to put it under playing tension, and we're on our home stretch a little bit there, I think. I'm just charging up some batteries so we've got enough. Where did I put them? Put one set out of the way. Batteries, one set done. Yeah, just charging up enough to run my amp to do the intonation when the time is right. Okay, so let's get out our tune-o-matic bridge and our stop piece. Again, we can just give this a quick polish as much as we can with our cleanish cloth. Okay, strings. Good old-fashioned 9s. Only ball 9s. May have just enough to do the guitars I want to do this weekend. After that we'll be short, so we have to order some more. See how we're doing. Right. Okay, so at the point of stringing, we need the string winder, which is up on the table already. We'll need the string winder, and we'll need the cutters, wire cutters. Take that out of the way. Right. So we'll start with lowest gauge, and we'll just put it through what we know is the string, and we'll put the bridge on the correct way round, which we now know is facing with the adjustments facing forward. The intonation. Now Malcolm says he set the intonation, so I won't mess with that, which means I won't have to do anything to the little individual saddles on there. So I'm putting these posts back in place, and I'm going to wind them to begin with right the way down to the stops at the bottom. We're going to be very optimistic and proceed from a belief that we can start almost as low as we can possibly go, and we'll work upwards from that. Okay, so on with the bridge. It feels a bit stiff sitting on there at that point. Okay, so just a couple of thoughts. We're going to raise up this end here so I can access these tuning pegs. Now, here's what I do. Actually, there are lots of different ways. There are ways of locking the string, which reminds me I was going to learn that. So I'm going to need to fetch back the nut for this guitar, which came off, if you remember, and I'm going to get myself a little bit of super glue, because now is the time to replace this, and whilst keeping the string well out of the way. So all I need is enough super glue on this to hold it in place on the wood. I don't want it to go everywhere. I don't need it running up the sides or anything. It's just got to stay in place on the bottom part, really. Here comes Maurice. So I'm just going to drop that in and make sure absolutely quickly before anything sets, make sure it's perfectly lined up, and I'm going to leave it there. And now as soon as I put it under pressure here, that's going to hold it in place. All right, Maurice? Yes. So I'm just going to do a fairly straightforward winding. So straight all the way through is what I tend to do, and then pull back about an inch, and then at that point I start winding it with the string winder. And unlike some of the horrors that I've seen on eBay, it's the rule of thumb: if you're never sure which way this turning should go, your string should always go to the center line of the guitar. Now this is trying to move the nut when I don't want it to move it. Stay there and dry. Okay, Maurice. Now you can hear that buzzing because the action's set so low down there. So once I've done that, I'm going to leave a couple of extra inches overhanging and cut back a bit, and then I'm going to move to the next one. Isn't that right? Maurice likes to run for chase the end of these strings when he can get around to it. Yeah, I was going to say there is a technique of tucking the strings round and sort of locking them under each other, which I have to say I've not learned, but I thought of it just then and actually realised I'm going to learn it. So maybe on the next guitar I do, the next couple from now, I'll attempt to do it that way. It apparently gives you a bit of extra protection against slipping and therefore detuning. So it might be well worth just experimenting, see how it works. Again, cut these off just for now, I don't want them all in the way. And that one's missed the saddle. Maurice, you can't have it. So now we're thinking just a little bit ahead. If you remember, we levelled the neck. We adjusted the truss rod a tiny bit, so that the neck was as flat as it could be with no load. And it's my experience that usually the load of the strings, once you put them back on, is enough to pull approximately the correct amount of relief, i.e. bendiness or curve, into the neck. It isn't always exactly the case, but so far in my experience it tends to largely be the case, and that's really useful because it means we often don't have to do any adjustments at all. Sometimes we do a little tiny bit, but we can often start from the position of not needing to adjust. Again, it will vary depending on the gauge of strings you use. If you use extremely heavy strings, they're going to put more pressure on the neck, and you may need to literally correct or dial out some of the neck relief that you've got in there. Now I'm going to move the guitar around here because I need to get access to these tuners. They're quite stiff because they're so well made, very positive and direct, but they don't move easily. Again, same old principle, giving myself an extra inch to work with, if you can see there, but an extra inch to work with, and then I wind it on, and whichever way it goes I make sure it goes to the inside, and you'll see pretty quickly if you're going the opposite way, and you just reverse what you're doing. And really we're by having pulled back that inch, we're saying that we've never got more than an inch of string wound onto this peg. Some people like to try and do it with even less, and hence the sort of tying, locking off mechanism trick. And some types of tuners, for example the Wilkinson Easy Lock tuners that I like a lot, they tend to do that as part of their design. Thanks, Maurice. But on day-to-day usage I found that an inch of wind or half to 1 inch is okay. Any more than that and you're creating a sort of spring effect, which means that it's going to react by, there'll be quite a lot of give in it when you bend. Okay, so this putting the strings on here at this point in time has an added advantage, I suppose, of pressing down the nut that we've stuck back in with a little bit of super glue. So all of the pressure now is holding that in place while the glue dries, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. And it will be nice and solidly fixed when we come to make the tiny alterations to the slots. Okay, so I'm now on the final string, the 0.09, the E string, and again all the way on, back somewhere near an inch, and then wind away with the string winder. And don't go too crazy, just slow down just as it begins to take up the slack, and just check that your travel of your string is correct. If you don't and it's crimped around something, you run the risk of putting a crimp into it, which will weaken the string unnecessarily. There's no reason why you want to do that if you can avoid it. Okay, so just make sure it's lined up and then put it under a bit more pressure. And then once we've done that, we'll go on to getting up to roughly a playing, tune up to roughly a playing pitch. And we don't have to worry at this point about being absolutely accurate. What we're looking to do is just put it under load. So at the moment we've got everything's really loose, and it's also decking out or bottoming out on the fretboard because the fretboard's wound down all the way. So the first thing we're going to want to do with that is to get ourselves up a screwdriver that we're going to use to adjust that. Is that okay? Yeah, that will do. So I'm going to use the screwdriver part of this because that's what it's made for. No easy way otherwise we're going to do it. Now I'm just noticing this bridge is not sitting perfectly. Oh, it is now. It wasn't sitting perfectly on, but now it is. So I'm taking it a bit up until I can hear a clear note on the bass string for starters. It's not clear yet. Okay, so I guess the rule of thumb will be take it up until you've got what feels like a clean note, and you know it's probably going to be roughly the same adjustment on either side. Now these strings are going to be very slack, and they're going to slack off, stretch quite a lot in the first few minutes, so you're going to probably benefit from pulling them quite a few times to get rid of that slack. It doesn't hurt as long as you're not too fierce with them. So as a start point, I just want that guide note. Okay, just as a reference point really for the full tension. And then we can work the others into that. Okay, so I know we've just taken that up to approximate tuning, and I'm just going to give it another good old pull. Get rid of as much of the slack as I can so that we don't have to do this too many times. I'm looking at an action at the moment of an incredibly low, it's probably a millimetre if that, but I wouldn't say that's right. Nice tuners. Okay, so we've now got ourselves to a place where we have a playing guitar and it's sounding out and it's working. Let me just find the guitar height, string height measuring device, which is now gone away somewhere, made itself scarce. Oh, here it is. Okay, so that's an incredibly low action. It's probably way too low. It's lower than we want. But the point being is, you can see that already on this guitar, it's we can start really low and see what we've got. So what the test we're going to do is just, let's look at the height of the action. And I've got to tell you that is ridiculous. That's not even 1 millimeter. That's about 0.9 millimeters. Question here, of course, is how do the notes sound? And this is the test of it. This is why you can pretty much guarantee it will be too low an action. But that's right, and you'll hear it choking because it's too low. So, point being is, there's two things now that are wrong that we need to correct. The first one is the action is probably too low, full stop, right? So it's unhealthy to be sub 1 millimeter. That's just, I mean, you could say, yeah, it's the easiest guitar in the world to play, but there's no point if it just buzzes out. So we don't want it that low. The other one is that there's also the relief in the neck that we haven't checked, and the relief in the neck will have considerable impact on whether these notes up here will bend or allow us to bend without choking out, which they're currently doing. Now, partly we can cure that with a mixture of raising the action and also making sure that the neck relief is exactly correct. So I'm just going to wind out a tiny bit more on the action first of all, and I'm just gauging this. So immediately that change gave us the accommodation to bend strings without them choking. So miniature changes, microscopic changes, allow you to transform the way it was playing. So the next thing I'm just going to check is, I'm going to look down the neck. Make sure I can see. Look down the neck and see. I'll use my other glasses for this. Just have a look at what relief these nines that I put on have pulled into this neck. I'm going to look at it from both ends. Now I can see there's a fair bit of relief in there actually. And it's probably it's not a bad amount. That's probably what you want. It's noticeable. So we started with a straight neck, levelled very carefully before we did the fret levelling, and now it's under the pressure of the strings. It's now naturally bowed forward, which has given us some relief. And Malcolm, if you're watching this, you'll be bored to tears. But if somebody else has not seen this before, a way of thinking about why we need some bend in the neck. Okay, so if you think about the strings from the nut end down here to the bridge end, okay, when you hit a string, it doesn't just go from side to side. It effectively, at some point, it'll do a bit of side to siding, but it will ultimately it will make a circle, go around in a kind of circle like this, like a skipping rope from school. And you can see, just like the skipping rope, the space, the distance it travels is bigger in the middle of the string than it is near the ends. So if you think about it, near the middle of the string, you need a bigger gap for the string to do this than at the ends, where there's hardly any kind of movement. And that's why you don't want a perfectly straight neck, because if you did, this string is still trying to do this, and you'll be hitting the deck ding, ding, as you go around. So a guitar neck has to have a curve in it, and actually it has to have sometimes quite a bit of curve depending on how slack your strings are If they're lighter gauge, there'll be more slack than if you're achieving the same pitch with a heavier gauge, and so on. So when you hear people say they just got a guitar and they look down the neck and they saw it was bent and they straighten the neck out and that's it, that's brilliant. Now it isn't the case. You've got to set the amount of relief you need to make sure the strings that you're using can tune to the tuning you're tuned to, can move in that full range of movement without hitting the fingerboard. And also the curve in the fingerboard can make a real big difference to how the notes fret as well, because if it's completely flat and you fret here and you've got a very, very low action, sometimes the curve of the fingerboard is what will choke off the note. Right? Sometimes it really wants to be flat, so there's a kind of a combination of things. So sometimes if you need, it's a balance between the amount of relief you have and the action height here. You've got to work them together to get the playing action you want. So again, we're about 1 millimeter, I would suggest. But again, it's probably too. Is it 1 millimeter? Is it even 1 millimeter? Yeah, I think we are. At 1.2 millimeters. That's still quite low, and you can really see it when you look down here. That's hardly anything at all. Slightly buzzy and choked off, so I'm going to raise it a tiny bit more. It's much better to get the right intonation, or the right what's the word? Resonance. Make the notes play correctly, and start from there. The other thing I'm bearing in mind is that while I'm setting this, I'm also going to take this end down, the action down a tiny fraction at this end too, which will microscopically, but will affect the overall action as well. So if you take it down at this end, it changes the angle and actually moves the string closer to the frets this end. Because of the angle that it describes, very acute angle, if you take that down, it's only a tiny amount that it gets closer to the fret down here, and vice versa the other way around. If we take the nut down, if that's the nut this end, and we take the nut down, then the angle gets closer, and this gets a little bit lower to the fret here. But again, it's very, very minute, but it's there, it's enough. So if you had made this absolutely marginal, so it was just about playable, but couldn't go any further, and then you took this down by 1/4 of a millimeter, you could find yourself suddenly getting buzzings and things that you didn't have, because at those limits, at those tolerances, you're really at the edge of what's playable. Okay, so I'm going to cut the film for a minute, bed these strings in. Get the playing action right. I don't want to carry on doing it on film. at the same time, and then I'll come back and we'll work on the nut, and then we'll move on from that. Okay, so see you in a sec. Rightio. I think I've just done a whole bunch of filming with no sound just as well. Anyway, what we're doing here is I'm setting all the distances or heights over this first fret of each of these strings to exactly 0.3 of a millimetre. And to do that, I have my gauge set to 0.3 and I put it under, and there's still clearance, so then I slacken it off. I slacken it off, and then I use my nut files to just cut away a little bit and blow the dust away, and then go and try it again. Doesn't have to be exactly in tune, it just has to be up to tension. We're nearly there with this one. Just going to cut a tiny bit more. And we're going to do all of them that way. I've done the first one already while I was recording with no sound. A good way of knowing if it's got any clearance is if you can still ring the note without it cutting off. You've still got a little way to go to reach the height, correct height. But we're nearly there, and so the whole thing here is to get all of these down to 0.3 of a millimetre. And when we've got that, it will play really easily. Very easy to fret the chords. And you'll find also that tiny bit more notes won't go out of tune, or they won't be the intonation won't go wrong when you play single notes down here, because you're not having to press them so far down or so hard, and that's actually the single greatest cause of intonation problems down this end. The guitar is the greatest cause of the single most likely cause of the guitar being hard to play, but also for the notes to go out of tune, to be sharp when you fret the notes down there, including some open chords, and it sounds horrible. So I'm using my there you go, that'll do me. I'm using my feeler gauges to get to the right measurement. I'm not measuring the height of the slot itself, I'm measuring the action of the first string, the first fret. So I'm going to check this next one, and I'm going to change files, and I'm going to move onwards, and I'll stop the camera work in a minute because it gets a bit boring after a while. So I get my nut file, and I just, tilting it slightly back, I just cut away a little bit. Now I know on this string there isn't an awful lot of depth I want to cut further down, so don't go too far. Then tune it up. And then check the height. Very close to that already. That's, we're starting. Again, you can still, if the note rings out, it's still got a little way to go, but it's not bad. We're nearly there on that one. A little bit more. So it's a very, very slow and persistent process, and it's a good thing that it is, because it means that you're much less likely to make a mistake or take too much material away in one go. So much better that you get there slowly. And the way I like to think about this is that it may seem like a long time to take doing this, but you think about how much pleasure you get from your guitar over the years. It's a small price to pay to take this bit slowly, given that you're going to enjoy playing it for so long. Still got some to go. Okay, so I'm going to stop this and come back to you when it's done. I said stop. Right, so here we are, all back in order, and yep, action set. Everything looking good. Bit of relief in the neck. Much lower action than it was before. Yeah. So there you go. The Swede, the Ultra Swede, the blonde Ultra Swede. Just needs a bit of a polish now, and we've got the action over the first fret set. We've got really low action here. Set. I'm just trying to quick look in the light, see if we can get the light on this, see what it is in millimeters at the 22nd fret. That's 1.5, 1.6. Hello you. Here comes Maurice to finish the day. Yeah, so we're done. We're just a bit of polishing up to go. And nice guitar, I like this. Very easy to play. Just as easy for clean tones as it is for extremely heavy, humbucked tones. So everything else is in order. Just a bit of a clean once we get out of the shed and into the house. Be ready to hand it back. So there you go. Hagstrom. First one I've ever seen. Interesting little bridge. We've leveled the frets, got the action quite a bit lower, both ends, and we've got a nice, really compliant guitar that plays incredibly easily, and nice smooth leveled frets, everything in order, and yeah, just pretty nice all round. Very slim neck, very easy to play. So. Perfect, isn't it, Maurice? Yes. Yes. Oh, no, aren't you beautiful? Fluff ball. Yeah, so, okay, well, we move on to the Schecter next. But meanwhile, we'll put this one back in the bag after we've given it a bit of a polish over. So, thanks for sticking it out for the Hagstrom. And I say, nothing surprising about this. All behaved as it should. Yes, and... yeah, no trouble. I quite like this style, this little piece at the back here. Gives you a nice, it gives you a nice place to rest your hand. Not obviously not doesn't mute the strings, but still quite nice, unusual. Okay, so we're done.